In 1965, a man's truck was his toolbox, his lifeline, and his pride. Long before cell phones, roadside service, and sealed engines, getting home often meant fixing it yourself by the side of the road. Behind the bench seat, under the floor mats, rattling in a steel box in the bed, sat tools every American man carried without thinking. Tools that pulled him out of ditches, kept his engine running, and got him to work when nothing else would. Today, most of them are forgotten, replaced by warning lights and tow trucks. From the chains that bit into winter ice to the one tool that got a man home no matter what, let us count down the 20 forgotten tools. Number 20. Number 20, tire chains. Lived in the bed of nearly every truck north of the Mason-Dixon line, coiled in a feed sack or an old ammo can, orange with rust by February. Before all-season radials and four-wheel drive in every driveway, winter could strand a man in his own yard. A set cost around $4 at the hardware store, and a man learned to lay them flat behind the rear wheels, back over them, and hook the crosslinks cold-fingered in the dark while the snow came down sideways. The bite of hardened steel on packed ice was unmistakable, a steady, metallic chatter at 20 miles an hour that meant you were moving when everyone else sat spinning. Farmers ran them to haul feed across frozen fields. Mill workers ran them up icy grades before dawn. Oral histories from the upper Midwest recall fathers kneeling in slush, knuckles bleeding, swearing under their breath, then climbing back in and driving off as if it were nothing. When studded snow tires and front-wheel drive arrived, the chains went quiet. Most men today have never hooked a single crosslink, but for a generation, those rattling chains were the difference between a paycheck and a missed shift. Number 19. The bumper jack stood folded behind the seat or clipped inside the bed wall, a long ratcheting column of stamped steel that hooked under the chrome bumper and lifted half a ton with the pump of a handle. It was crude, it was dangerous, and every man in 1965 knew exactly how to use it. You set the base on hard ground, slid the lift bracket under the bumper, and worked the lever as the truck rose with a series of sharp metallic clacks. A new one came with the truck, but a careful man kept a second in the bed because a jack that slipped on a soft shoulder could cost a man his hand or worse. Fathers taught sons to chock the wheels first and never crawl under a vehicle held up by nothing but that thin steel post. The smell of cold grease, the scrape of the ratchet, the lurch as the bumper took the weight, all of it was routine and on a Sunday afternoon flat. When hydraulic scissor jacks and unibody cars without real bumpers took over, the bumper jack disappeared almost overnight. Today, it survives in barns and estate sales, a relic of a time when changing your own tire was simply what a man did. Number 18. The battery hydrometer was a small glass tube with a rubber bulb on one end, and it told a man whether his battery would start the truck tomorrow morning. Before sealed, maintenance-free batteries, every battery had cells you opened with a coin, topping them off with distilled water and testing the acid inside. A man squeezed the bulb, drew up a sample of electrolyte, and read the floating gauge to measure the charge in each cell. A weak reading meant trouble coming, a chance to fix it in the driveway instead of on a freezing morning with a dead truck and a long walk to work. The tool cost less than $1 at any parts counter and lived in the glove box wrapped in a rag because the acid it drew up could eat a hole in your shirt. Oral histories recall the ritual of the Saturday battery check, the sharp chemical smell, the careful squint at the colored beads. Maintenance-free batteries, sealed shut at the factory in the 1970s, made the hydrometer pointless in a single decade. The skill of reading your own battery vanished with it. Today, a warning light tells you the battery is dead only after it already is. Number 17. The hand crank grease gun was the heartbeat of truck maintenance in 1965, a heavy steel cylinder with a long, flexible hose that pumped thick grease into every joint that moved. Before sealed, lifetime lubricated bearings, A truck had a dozen grease fittings, called zerks, hidden under the chassis at every tie rod, ball joint, and U-joint. A man crawled beneath his truck every 1,000 miles, found each fitting by feel, snapped the coupler over it, and worked the lever until fresh grease pushed the old black gunk out the seams. A gun cost a few dollars, and a tube of chassis grease cost pennies, but the payoff was a front end that lasted 100,000 miles instead of 40. The smell of fresh grease, the grit of gravel under your back, the satisfying give as a dry joint finally took its fill. This was the price of a truck that did not fall apart. Service stations offered a lube job for $1, but a careful man did it himself. When automakers began sealing joints for life in the 1980s, the grease gun moved from the truck to the back of the garage. A generation of men who once knew every zerk on their chassis now never look underneath at all. Number 16. The cold patch tire repair kit fit in a tobacco tin and saved a man a long walk more times than he could count. Before tubeless radials and run flats, tires ran inner tubes that punctured on every nail, thorn, and shard of glass on a country road. The kit held rubber patches, a tube of vulcanizing cement, and a little metal scuffer to rough up the rubber. A man pulled the tube, found the leak by listening or by dunking it in a creek and watching for bubbles, then buffed the spot, smeared the cement, and pressed the patch down hard with his thumb until it held. For tougher jobs, the hot patch version came with a small clamp and a fuel pellet you lit on fire to cure the rubber right there on the roadside. The whole repair cost a nickel in materials and 10 minutes of a man's time. Oral histories recall fathers patching a tube by lantern light on a dark farm road, then airing it back up and rolling on. Tubeless tires in the fix-a-flat can make the patch kit obsolete, and the throwaway tire finished the job. Today, a flat means a tow truck. In 1965, it meant a tobacco tin and a steady hand. Number 15, the foot-operated tire pump was the partner to that patch kit, a hinged steel bellows you stamped with your boot until the tire came back to pressure. There were no air compressors in a 1965 truck and no 24-hour gas stations on a rural route, so a man pumped his own air the hard way. He set the pump on the ground, screwed the brass fitting onto the valve stem, and stood on the platform, driving it down with his full weight, watching the little gauge creep up pound by pound. Filling a single truck tire took a few hundred strokes and left a man breathing hard, sweat on his brow even in cold weather. A good pump cost $3 or $4 and lasted decades, the rubber hose cracking long before the steel ever wore out. Oral histories recall men trading off, one pumping while the other rested, getting a wagon back on the road in the middle of nowhere. The 12-volt electric compressor in the convenience store air hose ended the foot pump's reign. The effort it demanded is hard to imagine now. But in 1965, a man's own two legs were the only air supply he could count on. Number 14. The points file and feeler gauge were the smallest tools in the box, and arguably the most important, because without them, the truck would not run at all. Every engine in 1965 fired through breaker points inside the distributor, a tiny pair of contacts that opened and closed thousands of times a minute and burned and pitted with use. A man pulled the distributor cap, found the points, and ran the thin file across the contacts to clean off the carbon, then slid a feeler gauge of the exact thickness between them to set the gap just right. Too wide and the engine missed. Too narrow and it stumbled. The whole kit cost under $1 and lived in the glove box in a paper sleeve. The skill was pure feel, learned from a father or an uncle leaning over a fender on a Sunday morning. Oral histories recall the satisfaction of an engine that fired clean on the first crank after a points adjustment, the proof a man had done it right. Electronic ignition arrived in the 1970s and erased the points entirely, and with them, the file and the feeler gauge. Today, the contacts that once needed a man's attention every few thousand miles do not exist. A generation that could set them by hand has nothing left to set. Number 13, the trouble light What men called a drop light was a bare bulb in a steel cage on the end of a long cloth-wrapped cord, and it turned the side of a dark road into a workshop. A 1965 truck broke down where it broke down, often miles from the nearest streetlight, and a man could not fix what he could not see. The drop light plugged into a socket or clipped to the battery, throwing harsh yellow light over the engine bay while the man worked. The metal cage kept the hot bulb off his knuckles, and a hook on top let him hang it from the hood latch so both hands were free. It cost a couple of dollars and the cord frayed long before the socket gave out. Oral histories recall the drop light as the difference between limping home and sleeping in the cab until dawn. Fathers holding the cage in their teeth to free both hands deep in the engine. The cordless work light and the smartphone flashlight replaced it, and the smell of a hot bulb and singed cloth went with it. Today, few men carry any light at all, trusting that help is one phone call away. Number 12, a roll of baling wire, what men simply called hay wire, was the most versatile thing in any truck. A coil of soft steel that fixed 100 things it was never meant to. Originally made for tying hay bales, it found its way into every truck bed in America because it bent by hand, held under strain, and cost almost nothing. A man used it to hang a sagging muffler, hold a hood shut, splint a broken radiator hose clamp, bind a load, or lash a bumper back on long enough to limp into town. The phrase a haywire outfit came to mean any rig held together by improvisation, half insult and half grudging respect. A coil cost pennies at the feed store and lasted a man for years, slowly unspooling through countless roadside fixes. Oral histories recall fathers twisting a few loops of wire around a failed part with a pair of pliers, then driving another 200 miles on the repair. The modern world of plastic clips, zip ties, and dealer-only parts pushed haywire out of the truck, but a generation of men knew that with a coil of soft steel and a little ingenuity, almost nothing was truly broken. Number 11, the adjustable wrench, what most men called a crescent wrench after the company that made it famous, was the one tool a man grabbed when he did not know what size bolt he was about to face. Its movable jaw turned with a knurled worm screw, fitting nuts from a quarter-inch to over an inch, and on a roadside breakdown with no idea what was loose, that flexibility was everything. A good one was forged steel, heavy in the hand, and lived right on top of the toolbox where a man could find it blind. It rounded off a stubborn bolt if you were careless, and every father warned his son to pull, never push, and to seat the jaw tight before he leaned into it. A quality wrench cost $1 or $2 and outlasted the man who bought it, passed down with the toolbox itself. Oral histories recall the crescent wrench as the first tool a boy was trusted with, the one that taught him the feel of metal under strain. Sets of cheap sockets and ratchets eventually crowded it out, faster and surer on a known bolt. But for the unknown bolt on a dark road, nothing beat the one wrench that fit them all. Number 10, the hacksaw rode in the bed or behind the seat, a thin steel blade stretched in a C-shaped frame, and it cut what nothing else in the truck could. A 1965 man fabricated and repaired on the fly, and when a part needed shortening, a bolt needed cutting, or a seized fastener needed sawing off, the hacksaw did the work. No wrench ever could. He clamped the piece, set the blade, teeth forward, and drew long, steady strokes, the rasp of steel on steel filling the quiet as a fine dust of metal drifted to the ground. Spare blades cost a dime and snapped if a man rushed or twisted the cut, so patience was part of the skill. Oral histories recall fathers cutting a fence post bolt, a frozen exhaust clamp, or a length of pipe by the roadside, the saw bending and singing with each pass. It demanded effort and gave back exactly what a man put in. The cordless reciprocating saw and the angle grinder eventually made the hacksaw seem slow. But it needed no battery, no cord, no charge, only a strong arm and a sharp blade, and it never once failed to start. Number 9. The Whetstone, an oil stone the size of a deck of cards, lived in the glove box wrapped in an oily rag, and it kept every blade a man owned sharp enough to do its job. In 1965, a dull knife or hatchet was not just useless, it was dangerous, slipping where a sharp edge would bite clean. A man dripped a few drops of light oil on the stone, set the blade at a low angle, and drew it across in slow circles, feeling for the burr that told him the edge was coming back. The hiss of steel on stone was a sound every boy grew up hearing on a tailgate after work or on the porch on a Sunday evening. A good stone cost $1 and lasted a lifetime, slowly dishing out in the center from decades of use. Oral histories recall fathers testing a fresh edge against a thumbnail or a hanging thread, taking quiet pride in a knife that shaved hair. The disposable blade and the replace it, don't fix it culture made sharpening a lost art. Today, most men carry blades they will never sharpen and throw them away when dull. But a man in 1965 knew that a stone in a few minutes could bring almost any edge back to life. Number 8, the single bit axe, often a hand hatchet riding under the seat, was the tool a man reached for when the road itself was blocked. A 1965 truck traveled back roads and logging trails where a fallen limb or a downed tree could end a journey cold, and there was no crew coming to clear it. A man kept the head oiled and the edge keen, and when a tree lay across his path, he climbed out, spat on his hands, and went to work, the steady thock of steel on green wood echoing through the timber. The hatchet split kindling for roadside fire, drove stakes, knocked frozen mud from the wheel wells, and served as a hammer in a pinch. A good axe cost $2 or $3, and a man hung it where he could grab it without looking. Oral histories recall fathers clearing a path in the rain, chips flying, then dragging the cut limbs aside and driving on. The chainsaw made felling faster, and the cleared modern highway made the need rare. But for a generation that drove where the pavement ended, a sharp axe under the seat was simply common sense. Number 7, the timing light looked like a pistol with a stubby barrel, and it let a man tune the very heartbeat of his engine. In 1965, an engine's ignition timing, the precise instant each spark fired, drifted out of adjustment and robbed the truck of power and fuel economy. A man clipped the light's leads to a spark plug wire and the battery, aimed the flashing strobe at a mark on the spinning crankshaft pulley, and turned the distributor by hand until the mark lined up exactly where it belonged. The strobe froze the spinning pulley in midair, a small piece of roadside magic that let a man see something moving thousands of times a minute. A light cost around $10, more than most tools, which made it a point of pride to own one. Oral histories recall men gathering around an open hood, taking turns aiming the strobe, debating a degree or two of advance like it mattered, because it did. Computer-controlled ignition erased the adjustment entirely in the 1980s, and the timing light went dark. The engine that once answered to a man's hand now answers only to a sensor. The skill of timing an engine by eye has quietly disappeared. Number 6, the spark plug. Gap gauge was a small round tool, often a coin-shaped disc with stepped edges or a set of wire feelers, and it set the tiny gap that made the spark jump. Every engine in 1965 ran on spark plugs. A man pulled, cleaned, and re-gapped himself because new plugs were a real expense and good ones could be saved with care. He wedged the gauge between the plug's center electrode and the bent side electrode, then tapped the electrode gently against a bench until the gap measured exactly right, often around 35 thousandths of an inch. Too wide and the spark would not jump. Too tight and the engine fouled. The whole gauge cost a quarter, and a complete plug change cost an afternoon. The smell of gasoline and hot metal hanging in the garage. Oral histories recall fathers reading a plug's color like a doctor reading an x-ray. Tan for good, black for trouble, white for trouble of another kind. Long life platinum plugs and sealed engines made gapping unnecessary, and the little gauge fell out of every glove box in America. Today, most men have never held one. But once, reading and gapping a plug was the most basic test of whether a man knew his own truck. Number 5. Jumper cables, heavy copper wrapped in cloth-covered insulation with stout spring clamps, were the tool that turned a stranger into a neighbor on any cold morning. A 1965 battery had a hard life, and a truck left out in a northern winter often refused to turn over. There was no roadside service to call, so a man flagged down the next vehicle, popped both hoods, and clamped the cables red to red and black to black, the spark snapping as the connection took. Both engines idled while the dead battery drank its fill, and then, with luck, the cold truck coughed and caught. A good set cost a few dollars, and a man coiled them carefully so they were ready in the dark with frozen fingers. Oral histories recall the unspoken code of the road that no man drove past another stranded in the cold, because next time it might be him. The jump start built a kind of fellowship the modern tow truck never could. Today, many drivers have never given or received a jump, and many cars warn against doing it at all. But for a generation, a set of cables in the truck meant you were never truly stranded, and neither was anyone you passed. Number 4, the 4-way lug wrench, a heavy iron cross with a different socket on each arm, was the tool a man trusted with his life every time he changed a tire. The flimsy stamped wrench that came with the truck often rounded off a tight lug nut or bent under a man's weight, so a careful man bought the cross-style wrench and kept it in the bed. Its 4 arms gave leverage no single-handed wrench could match, and a man could stand on one arm to crack a nut that road grime in an overeager gas station had torqued down to nothing. The cold iron in the hand, the grunt of effort, the sudden give as a stubborn nut broke free, this was the rhythm of a roadside flat in 1965. A good 4-way cost a couple of dollars and lasted forever, the chrome wearing to bare steel at the sockets. Oral histories recall fathers handing the wrench to a son and watching him learn the trick of using his whole body, not just his arm. The cordless impact wrench made quick work of the same job, and the 4-way slide to the back of the garage. But for raw, dependable leverage that never needed charging, the iron cross had no equal. Number 3, the brace and bit was a hand drill shaped like a sweeping crank, and it bored holes with nothing but a man's own muscle. Before cordless drills, a man in 1965 who needed to drill through wood or sheet metal on a job, a fence, or a broken bracket reached for the brace, locked a bit into its jaws, leaned his chest against the top knob, and turned the offset handle in steady circles. The bit sank deeper with every revolution, curls of wood or fine metal shavings spiraling out of the hole. It was slow, deliberate work, but it gave a man complete control. No cord to find, no battery to die, just the quiet ratchet of the mechanism and the steady pressure of his own weight. A brace cost a few dollars, and a set of bits a few more, and together they handled nearly any hole a man needed. Oral histories recall fathers boring fence posts and patching truck beds by hand, the work unhurried and sure. The electric drill, then the cordless, made the brace a museum piece in a single generation. Today its slow turning seems quaint, but it never failed, never ran flat, and asked nothing of a man but his own strength. Number 2, the come-along, a hand-cranked cable winch was the tool that let a man rescue himself when no one was coming to help. A ratcheting drum wound a steel cable around a spool as a man worked a long lever, multiplying his strength until he could drag a 1-ton truck out of mud, snow, or a ditch by his own arm. He hooked one end to a tree or a fence post, the other to his bumper, and cranked, the cable stretching tight and humming with strain, the truck creeping free an inch at a time. It was slow, brutal work, and a snapped cable could take a man's head off, so he learned to drape a coat over the line to kill the whip. A come-along cost $10 or $15, a serious purchase, and a man treated it with respect. Oral histories recall fathers winching a stuck truck out of a flooded field at dusk, alone, refusing to leave it until it rolled free. The electric winch and the cell phone that summons a tow truck made it nearly extinct. But the come-along embodied something the tow truck never could, the conviction that a man got himself unstuck by his own strength, no matter how long it took. Number 1, the TOW chain, a heavy length of hardened steel links with a hook on each end, crowned the toolbox as the truest symbol of the 1965 man and his truck. Coiled in the bed, rusted and oil-stained, it represented everything that mattered about driving in that era: self-reliance, strength, and the unwritten duty to help another man in trouble. When a neighbor's truck slid into a ditch, a stranger bogged down in a field, or a friend's engine died on a lonely road, the chain came out. A man hooked it to the frame, never the bumper, eased the slack out until the links snapped tight with a sound like a rifle shot, and pulled the dead weight free. A good log chain cost several dollars and lasted generations, handed down with the truck and the toolbox, every link a small history of someone help. Oral histories recall the code of the road in those years, that you stopped, you hooked up, you pulled, and you waved off any offer of money, because tomorrow it might be you in the ditch. The cell phone and the tow service made the chain unnecessary, and with it faded the fellowship of strangers helping strangers. But for a generation of American men, a tow chain in the bed was a promise that no one stayed stuck for long. These 20 tools were never just steel and rubber. They were the proof of a kind of man who fixed what broke, cleared his own road, and never drove past someone in trouble. Today, the warning light glows, the phone comes out, and the tow truck is on its way. But somewhere, there is still a steel toolbox behind a bench seat, a coil of haywire, and a chain rusting in the bed, waiting for a man who remembers how to use them. Which of these did your father or grandfather keep in his truck? Let me know in the comments, and do not forget to subscribe.